Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. My name is Kevin Pickard. We're here to share stories that inspire you to challenge the status quo, challenge yourselves, and hopefully take positive action in your own lives. Stay up to date on all our social media pages as we will be rolling out more content in the coming months. Just search for the Rogue Monkey podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. So, on to today, and I'm happy to share our interview with Jack Rolfe, founder of The Coaching Lab. I'm not going to say too much as Jack's story is absolutely brilliant that he shares with us today. He's a former athlete, coach and a very creative mind. He's currently marooned in Western Australia after a short trip turned into more than a year abroad with no end in sight due to the pandemic. We explore Jack's journey as well as some of the philosophies around coaching, feedback and how we grow and develop as people. It's a wonderful discussion, so without further ado, let's get into it. And episode 43 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. Jack Rolfe, changing the game with Matchplay Cards. Hello and welcome to the show, Jack. How are you doing?
Kevin, how are you? Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, welcome. It's nice and early where we are, and it's late afternoon where you are. But thanks for joining us. Could you just give our listeners a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and the kind of your headline journey so far?
Yeah, headline journey. I suppose currently I'm just come back from the beach, so you can tell I'm not in England at the moment. Englishman abroad, so currently in Perth, Western Australia, living what is a coach's dream. Get to work in hockey pretty much full time and run the coaching lab as well. So yeah, living the dream on that front. Failed international hockey player. Like a lot of coaches, you always have a dream to go and represent your country. And at the age of 17, 18, and didn't get selected for the junior age groups, which sparked my coaching interest and sparked my journey really. Now I look back. Worked in education for 5 years in the UK. Went to Canterbury Christchurch University, undergrad degree in sports coaching science. Hockey would be my sport, but now doing a lot more work in different environments in different sports.
That sounds like from first and foremost a coach, but very much with the born and bred sportsman within you. So it's definitely, I guess, a lifelong passion. Where did kind of hockey all start for you? Was that something that you decided that very early on you wanted to do, or was it something you fell into at secondary school?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think now you look back and you think it's one of those sports that if no one gives you a stick and a ball, you'll never play it. Unlike football or AFL or anything like that, you can't just go and play it down the park. There's got to be some sort of equipment. So I saw a poster on my junior school wall at Turn Furlong in Buckinghamshire, and I said to my dad, can I go and play hockey as a 6-week after school program? And to this day, I don't know what it was that I said to myself that I want to go and play. Like every kid in England, you play football growing up. But there was, as I say, this poster. Did my 6 weeks after school. And then the 4th week, the guy, Trevor Chandler, rang up my dad and said, I think your boy is pretty good. Does he want to come and join the club? And I think my dad said, I hope you got the right child or you got the wrong child here. And then joined Aylesbury Hockey Club. And that was the journey from there. Went on to play for a few more clubs in England.
Do you think, without kind of unpicking it like too early on, do you think obviously your parents had quite a big steer in your sporting journey early on?
Yeah, I think so, because they were committed to me and they kind of provided the opportunities, but they weren't, go and do this, go and do that. I was the dyslexic kid at school that probably struggled, and, parents probably recognised that actually sport was quite a powerful tool. So, they didn't tax me off to every single sport to try and make me a superstar. But if there was something I wanted to do, they were definitely there for me.
That's cool. And I think, like you mentioned there, you referred to it as failed athlete. And I think that's, I guess I find it's almost like a misconception, because an athlete that picks up a sport, if they're in primary school, where it can all go through to the 17, 18, kept fit, kept healthy, I'd almost, again, I'm quite a glass half full kind of person, and I'd be like, well, that's a great job done in the sport, that you've had kind of 8 to 10 years of something that keeps you fit, healthy, you enjoy, probably made quite a few good friends out of it, and it's ended up forging a lifelong passion. So I'm kind of curious of the system in this country that can often spit athletes out at 18 and say, you failed, whereas actually kind of I think, wow, what a great job that athlete's done to stay involved in that sport for so long and get a lot from it.
Yeah, I think just on that, I think if anybody from a national governing body or pathways listening, I think if you're going to run a player pathway, I reckon you should run a coaching or umpiring official pathway alongside it. I look at my journey, didn't make the England squad at 18, but then there was a coaching opportunity arose for me. But if there wasn't that, I wouldn't still be in the sport. So I would encourage every national governing body within a pathway that there's got to be something else sit alongside it, because there's only 24 athletes into a full-time program. And if you're one of the 24 that don't make it, you ultimately want to stay in the sport. But to me, there should be a pathway that runs alongside, your performance pathway.
Yeah, I have conversations with lots of athletes actually about that, and the moment where they're either cut from funding or dropped from a junior squad or don't make a trials or whatever it is. And actually that can be a make or break moment where it either drives them massively forwards, perhaps into their senior career, maybe at university, to kind of try and push on, or it just completely disengages them, and the last you hear from them. So it is curious. And I think also, especially if you look at the age of athletes, that actually obviously it's different from sport to sport, but you see a lot of athletes that are coming through later on in their careers, and certainly in their 20s, and we're making decisions on whether they're going to make it quite early on. And I don't think I'm that comfortable with that, because I think most of the research, when you read it, and there are a few exceptions in certain sports, but the vast majority of them talk about post-puberty, mature growth, finding almost effectively adults that are actually fit to do their sport, instead of predicting off some arbitrary measures where they're going to end up.
Yeah, we're probably looking in the wrong places for not long enough. I truly believe you should have more eyes and more ears for longer periods of time. But I suppose it comes down to a resources thing ultimately.
So obviously that shapes, as we've already said, kind of where you are now. So at what point, when you went into you kind of got that knockback, if you like, from an athlete point of view, did you think this is a coaching opportunity, this is something I really want to do? And did you kind of plan on this actually ending up how it has, or has it all been just organic and kind of you've taken it as it comes?
Very much so. If you said in 6 years' time I'd be sat in Australia working for Hockey Western Australia and doing projects with all these different national governing bodies and stuff, I wouldn't have seen it, and I probably wouldn't have asked for it, because I wouldn't have known it was possible in a way. So definitely a very unintentional pathway. But like every kid, if there's an opportunity to coach to get some money in your back pocket over the summer, you do it. And that was probably my first opportunity of coaching. And I look back now, I don't think I've ever applied for a job, because now I look back and think, okay, you're always advertising yourself, but actually everything's come through a connection or a right place, right time opportunity. So it's been quite organic in that route. I haven't said, right, I want to be here or I want to be here. It's been quite natural, which is a dream for me. Do
you find there's an element of, I'm speaking selfishly, I find there's an element of frustration with people saying, oh, you're lucky, or you'll always seem to be in the right place or the right time? And I'm like, that doesn't happen by chance. Like you mentioned there about like connections and stuff like that, and I see far too often, especially when I'm working with kind of youth into early senior level athletes, some that potentially aren't going to make it in the elite sector, but actually they want to work in the sport or whatever they want to do. And I'm like, you either are, or you're definitely not putting yourself in positions to either network, get the right contacts, volunteer with people, have conversations with them, pick up the phone. I don't know what kind of your view is on that.
Yeah, 100%. I live by two things. Number one is you make the most of every opportunity that you do, and the other one is if you don't ask, you don't get. So they're two things that stay quite close to me. And I suppose the third one would be you're always advertising yourself. So everything you do, you're an advertisement. You're a walking CV effectively, and I see a lot of coaches on Twitter or how they manage themselves outside of the sport or whatever, and you think, I probably wouldn't apply for that job. I wouldn't invite that person to apply. And you know what it's like. Every sport is a very small world. We had a player this year said she wanted to come to Australia, rang a couple of people and they said, don't go anywhere near her. So it's such a small world where you have those connections that when you're a young coach, you probably don't realise that. You don't realise how small it is, and people are always talking about you.
And I think also it works the other way, doesn't it? I think of young athletes that have volunteered on deck, perhaps doing like the Duke of Edinburgh and stuff like that. They've gone through the early coaching stuff. They might be doing some teaching with the local schools or whatever it is, doing a bit of voluntary work. And then, in a year or two's time, you get a phone call from a coach somewhere or an employer somewhere and says, "Hi, I've got this person who's put you as a potential reference, or you've been involved with them." And I think, great, that kid was wonderful. They were working hard. They've got all the attributes you want. Like, I'd recommend them in a heartbeat. So I think people often don't see that. They seem to think it might just be a case of, I'll make the connection and I'll get an in. But actually, it's kind of like all that work, especially if you've worked with the athlete early on in their career, it actually opens doors for them that perhaps at 15, 16, they're not even aware of.
And I think you can try too hard sometimes. I look at hockey's my background. I think people try very hard to fit a certain profile. And I don't know how many coaches actually coach true to themselves with their own personality. I think they often feel like they have to be a certain somebody or act in a certain way to get a position. But we all know the best coaches at the top level coach through personality, coach through their interactions. So you've got to stay true to yourself.
And it's value added as well. Like, we're at an age where within reason, pretty much anything can be found out by anyone at the touch of a keyboard, where it's actually who you are, especially if you're authentic and true to yourself. It's so individualized. And also the athletes you're working with are so individualized. So if you haven't got that ability to flex a little bit and be open-minded and try different things, you're really going to struggle. Obviously, it depends on what sport you're working in, but most modern day coaches need to have some level of flex within their style and actually try conversations with other people in different ways and thinking about things perhaps more creatively than maybe 20, 30 years ago.
I was asked a question 6 months ago, and someone said, "What would the players say about you?" No one's ever asked me that question, but that was one of the best questions I've ever been asked, because it asked me to reflect on me as an individual, but also the people in front of me as well. And that's the question that every coach should ask themselves: what would the players say about you? I live by that question now.
I like that. And I think also, like, it can almost become like an echo chamber where if a coach thinks they're doing exactly what they should be doing and posts it on social media or whatever, and all they're surrounded by is a group of like-minded coaches, and everyone goes, "Oh yeah, that's great, that's fantastic," they think they're giving their kids exactly what they need. And they might be, but actually, I remember I went to a conference 5-6 years ago, quite a long time ago, when I was still coaching full time. And the Monday morning after I came back from the conference, I got a whiteboard out and I said to the kids, in the 2-hour training session, you can get out at any point and just write on the board why you swim. Just summarize it in like 3 or 4 words. And some of the stuff that got put up on the board, and got the other coaches on deck, like, look at this. This is our national age group squad. That's why they swim. And it completely changes your view on things when actually you almost second guess it a little bit. And also, if you've been through it as an athlete, you assume they're there because of the reasons you were there.
There's a good friend of mine and a mentor of mine, Sophie Gerritz, in Belgium, and she coached Antwerp women in the top division. And there's a team photo that she had, and above every single athlete, there was their age, their journey to get to training, how long did it take, what's their job, what's their family interactions, all this sort of stuff. And in this team photo, you could see each individual, but you could see why they were doing what they were doing. And to me, it was one of the best images I've ever been shown, because you could see each individual or the person behind every player.
I'd be really curious, kind of backtracking a little bit to your journey then, how this idea for the coaching lab came about. Did you go to an event? Did you read a book? Did you have a conversation with someone and kind of think, could be onto something here? Or kind of how did it all unfold?
Yeah, university dissertation. And I think I probably should say I'm dyslexic, so that probably had a huge influence in it. 10,000 word dissertation on psychological skills after visiting some of the best football academies in the UK and some of the best hockey coaches and pathways, and came out with 4 principles of psychological skills and environments, which is fantastic. It's great, but 10,000 words is no benefit to anybody. It's got all these big words, got all these references, all these dates, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to help a coach on a Saturday morning or Wednesday night coaching. So Matchplay Cards, or the concept of coaching through cards, kind of came about through that, to make that theory practical research, so it could come out and ultimately explore, experiment and share with the 3 guiding principles around how we can just bring more coaches together, support more people, and just be someone neutral. So we're not a national governing body or whatever, just a connection base to support more coaches.
So tell us a little bit about the cards and kind of what they actually are, and kind of maybe some examples of the kind of things people can expect from them.
Yeah, so based on 4 principles of design. So ever-changing environment, transfer of responsibility, train above the game, and be reflective. So based around 4 principles that a coach or an environment and players could develop their psychological skills in. Each card might have a different challenge on, it might have a different question, a reflection question. And one of the big things with the questions is players or athletes can't answer yes or no. So they have to share their experiences, they have to have a conversation, have to generate some sort of interaction. But then the flip side for that is the coach gets some feedback, gets some interaction, gets to see learning happen. And that's one of the most powerful things, that because it's on a card and they're plastic and you can throw them anywhere, they're multi-sport, you're seeing coaches are seeing learning happen. So they're given a challenge to a player or an athlete. They're seeing the thought process, they're seeing the interactions, but then the coach can support that, because the cards aren't stopping the coach from coaching, which is an important message. The coach still needs to coach, but it's using the cards as a support tool.
It's one of the things I've seen over the years is a lot of talk around toolboxes, and actually, especially in the research area, and I talk with quite a few academics about this, is actually there's some amazing stuff out there, but it's almost hidden or camouflaged by the, I don't know what you'd call it, but the language generally that academics like to use, and in some cases have to use. But actually, from a coaching point of view, if you're on the field, on deck, wherever you are, you want something that is boom, boom, boom. Can I use it? Can I get the information across to a kid in the length of a tweet? And if I can't, then it's too much information. And this kind of ticks that box really well, but in a research-based way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the other big things was developing the individual within the team. So particularly in a group setting, you're always going to have mixed ability. Whether that's a performance group, you're always going to have different levels. But the cards were there also to support the coach, support the individual as well. And one of the big things, I truly believe, reflection is the golden ticket to learning. So, but it's also one of the most forgotten things in coaching. It's often the last thing you do when you're 2 minutes over the session and you've got to be out of the pool, or the next group are on the pitch. Actually, it should be integrated into the session. So the cards were based around that as well, just to make it accessible, make it playful, and just make it really engaging.
How did you actually kind of get it all up and running and off the ground? Because I noticed, obviously, flicking through the website, you've got the affiliation with Virgin Startup, and how did you kind of, as a student coming off the back of dissertation, go from that to kind of what it is now?
Yeah, pretty crazy. So celebrated 2 years in December 2020, which marked 31 countries of distribution, countless elite clubs and organisations using them right down to grassroots. So the journey's been pretty cool and it's been pretty wicked. But ordered 100 sets to start off with and had no idea where they were going to go. And then Virgin Startup came on board about a year ago, and that was really nice, just recognition for where it's heading, but where it's come from as well. And ultimately, I'm a sports coach, a bit more of an entrepreneur, business person now, but probably didn't have all that backbone stuff of how can we get it from here, how can we get it from there. So they've just been the big support network. I've got a good mentor at Virgin, some really good opportunities to interact with their staff as well, but ultimately just to grow, but sustainably as well. So you don't want to, one of the big things was, we don't sell it to make money, we just sell stories and sell opportunities. And that was, what we've done, and probably one of the biggest reasons why they've continued to grow is because there is a story and there's an interaction behind it.
Well, obviously with the modern day world and the connections you've got through obviously social media and other digital platforms, I'd imagine it is quite a two-way relationship with some of the people that are using these, like they're getting in touch and sharing stories, or you're getting these anecdotes of where they've had an impact. And I don't know if you can just share kind of any that have stuck out with you over this journey so far.
Yeah, it's always nice to see a coach use them or tweet about them. And I ring up a lot of people and they often say, who's this? And you think you have to introduce yourself, and they get quite shocked when the founder of a company rings them up and says, how are you doing? Can we get some feedback? Can we see how it's going or whatever? So I'd ring up a lot of people and just see what's going on, which I think is a good thing. A couple of stories, take two sports. So one would be rugby recently, the Australian rugby team have been using them, in the Wallaroos, particularly the reflection ones on camp. So been away for 6 months, haven't seen each other, only seen each other over Zoom. First week back on camp, coaches were just putting the questions at the dining hall on a recovery session, just to spark a bit of conversation, a bit of connection, just to get people talking, that's so cool for me. So they, the elite level preparing for a World Cup, and they're using that resource. And then the flip end would be a football foundation in London, in the UK, with Bloomsbury Football. So one of the best football foundation charities in the UK, working with boys and girls, probably from disadvantaged backgrounds, so probably haven't got those confidence and the social skills that a lot of other people may have in certain other areas. So they've been using the cards just to develop that confidence, develop the interaction, the self-awareness, but not just in a football context, but actually using the cards to support behaviour change, to support the coach-athlete relationship. So that's from top end at the elite level down to grassroots would be 2 examples there of how they've been used.
I really like some of the words you mentioned there around, behaviour change and things like that, because very often, and not really of a massive criticism, but a lot of coaches can get sucked into gimmicks, if you like, and things that potentially are on just face value, someone shaking their pom-poms, and that's about it. Whereas actually, the fact this is kind of founded in research, it's usable, and it's usable across a range of areas, actually makes it a really great tool, but actually something that's not complicated. Often you can get these new fandangled systems that might involve, thousands of pounds worth of tech, with all these screens and everything else. Whereas it's actually going, no, get out there, here you go, get involved. Yeah,
and just go, you can't go wrong. Coaching is an experiment ultimately in every sort of way. It's an experiment. But it's also a bit of a showcase and audition act kind of style. So there's no right or wrong way to use them. And if we're asking players to learn, the coach has to learn as well. So you'll put a couple of cards in, you think, that worked, or I might do that differently next time. So who are we to say this is how you have to use them? Coaches still have to coach.
So talking about kind of trying new things and flexibility and stuff like that, your position you're in right now probably wasn't planned at the start of the year, start of last year now, how time's flying. What kind of, I said, is coming next? Actually, you may not know, but kind of looking back on pre-COVID, shall we say, January, February, March time, what did you envision the next 12 months to look like compared to how it's actually panned out?
I didn't expect to be in Australia for Christmas, number one. So left the UK in March. I thought, okay, I'll come back in April, May, and then come back again in August, September, and quite a flexible working trip. And that hasn't happened one bit. So had to be a bit of adaptability there. COVID was probably the best thing that ever happened. It helped the transition over. But for that, if I looked at January 2020, looking ahead, it probably was definitely to grow the coaching lab, was with more series of cards, which will happen, support more coaches, support more organisations. But who would have thought would be sat, having just come back from the beach in 35 degrees heat in a COVID-free place? It's amazing.
So I'm curious a little bit around kind of what comes next, because obviously you said you wouldn't have anticipated kind of where it is now. Having had, I guess, the stability of being in one place for quite a while, even if it wasn't planned, has that kind of changed things for you a little bit, or have you kind of broadened your horizons or thought about new ideas for, say, the next 12 months?
It's a good point, because I think it is the longest I've spent in one place, actually. I think I look at the UK, I travelled into Europe or to South Africa. I think I've been away. My sister gives me a lot of stick. I've been away for a birthday for about the past 5 years. So I've always travelled a lot, and it's been quite nice to actually be in the same position for what's coming up 12 months. And I've loved it. I haven't spent longer than a couple of hours in the car. So that's been nice. But what's coming up next, I think, will always be learning-led and people-driven. So as much as we say, okay, this is where we want to be, actually, we'll learn through the experiences and learn what the coaching community wants and needs, and continue to capture the feedback of the cards to where that then goes next, because we know it's such a dynamic, ever-changing environment that actually we can release a product great, but if it's not going to be impactful to what I see in the next 12 months to be a very different sporting environment, we'll stay close to being learning-led and people-driven.
Have you got any other ambitions in terms of like things other than the cards, in terms of what the coaching lab's going to offer and actually do you think that with the huge shift in terms of people accessing things online, that's going to become like a wing, if you like, to the project?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the big things is obviously Matchplay Cards is the product, but there's the research that goes behind that. And to share that research through webinars and workshops with clubs, coaches, organisations is a really important area, because actually it's the bridge from where the research is to the product. So there's definitely we'll be really keen to share that research, what we saw, what we recognised, and how that ended up into what it is now. So yeah, the online workshop space is something we're really keen to explore.
And then I guess just kind of finally, looking back on, obviously before we started recording, you talked about how old you actually are. Having had so many different experiences kind of relatively early on in your career, what would you have said to yourself looking back at, say, 14, 15, 16, where there's probably a lot of athletes out there that actually are sitting on the fence, if you like, as to what comes next? What would you have said to either yourself or some of the people listening?
That's a really good question. I would have tried harder, because I reckon I probably wouldn't have been too far away if I put a lot more work into it. And when it's gone, it's gone. So I'd definitely try as hard as you can and commit to it 110%. I'd smile more. I'd enjoy every moment. And I'd probably ask more questions. I look back as an athlete, I was probably the one that didn't ask enough questions. I was always front of the queue and on time and organised, but I probably didn't ask enough questions. And of course I tried hard, but you can always try harder, but you don't know where your potential goes or what those opportunities will lead to. So yeah, definitely try a lot harder and just commit 110%, ask more questions and just smile a lot more.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed that. It's nice unpicking it all, and in the show notes and the outro, we'll make sure we include all the links to both the organisation and yourself on Twitter, because I think you're onto some really, really cool stuff, and it was just nice to kind of connect and explore the story a little bit.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Keep up the great work, and the podcast is, it's wicked.
Thanks again to Jack there. A super cool story. We recorded that episode back in January 2021, and we're now at the end of May, and I'm pleased to report that Jack is still smashing his coaching role out in Australia and doing well. We've included in the show notes the links to Jack's Twitter, where he's really active, as well as the Coaching Lab website, where you'll find the range of Matchplay cards that Jack has created. And we've actually got some. They're awesome, so we can strongly advocate checking them out for yourselves. Next week, we are joined by someone who has another hugely creative mind. He's been awarded an MBE for his work in community education and sport, and is widely recognised as one of the leading creative thinkers when it comes to supporting people and their learning. So join us next week as we speak to Richard Cheetham, MBE. Thanks again for joining us for the Rogue Monkey Podcast.